What's up guys, welcome back. Yes, I got a new toy. This is the Spike CF5 conical fermenter. Let me explain. Before we get started on this review and we get too deep into the details, I just want to make a couple things perfectly clear here. First of all, number one, this is an unbiased review. I bought this fermenter with my own money. Spike did not contact me and send it to me. Spike did not have any sort of presence whatsoever within this process. I wanted this thing, did my own research, and bought it for myself using my own money. This is something I've been looking at for a long time, and I just happened to get a good bonus at work at just the right time for it. The other thing that I really want to say right now is that while this is definitely high-end home brewing equipment, that definitely doesn't mean that it's necessary to make good beer with. You're going to get so much farther with a plastic bucket and good brewing fundamentals than somebody with this fermenter and poor brewing fundamentals. As a home brewer, the best thing you can do to make better beer is to get better at brewing. Better equipment does not make better beer. Better brewers make better beer. That being said, what this is going to do for me is make the brewing process a whole lot easier, and specifically the fermentation process. Obviously because it's a fermenter. The thing that really spurred me over the edge to actually go ahead and pull the trigger on this thing was the fact that my Fermzilla, well, it's just not going to cut it anymore. I have both a regular Fermzilla with the collection jar underneath and the Fermzilla All-Rounder. The Fermzilla All-Rounder is a great piece of equipment. It does exactly what it needs to do. It ferments under pressure quite well and is easily cleaned. I really have no complaints about the Fermzilla All-Rounder. I have complaints, however, with the regular Fermzilla. It is the second design evolution already of the Fermzilla. The first one had issues with the collection jar, and this one is better, at least, with the collection jar. You see there are little carbonation caps that screw on the collection jar for the Fermzilla, and if you use it like I do, you need it to be under pressure, and in order to keep a good seal while under pressure, you really have to crank those things down on plastic thread, and if you want to be a good brewer, you need to pay attention to sanitation, which means you need to take all that stuff apart at the end of the brew day and clean it. The problem is I've bought 3 collection jars to replace them because they keep cracking, because every time I crank it down to a point where it actually holds pressure and doesn't leak, it breaks. And I'm really kind of sick and tired of having to replace pieces of my fermenter all the time, and it just made me upset to the point that I can't really recommend that piece of equipment any further in good conscience. Again, that was another thing I bought with my own money. Fermzilla never paid me anything for it, but I can't recommend it anymore because I just can't use it effectively. So that's what spurred my purchase of this guy. So I'm going to put this to the test for the first time with my Irish Red Ale that I'll be brewing in about 2 days. And we're going to go through an entire fermentation with it, and I'll try to capture as many of the different features of this system as I can during that fermentation, and then we'll just follow it up at the very end with a total review and recap of everything. In addition to the fermenter body itself, the Spike CF5 conical comes with a bunch of different accessories in the kit. So first of all, we have our 90-degree elbow here. That is for the trub and yeast dumping port. It comes with a thermowell here. It comes with this blow-off tube, which will go onto the lid, a sample port here so that you can take basically hydrometer samples without actually opening up the fermenter. Comes with 3 little feet here, and then a 1.5-inch tri-clamp butterfly valve, as well as a 2-inch tri-clamp butterfly valve. And then you get 2 2-inch tri-clamps and 4 1.5-inch tri-clamps, as well as 1 4-inch monster tri-clamp here, and then the metal cap that goes on top. In the base kit, we have the fermenter body itself here, which really does have some of the best weld work I have actually ever seen on anything, to be honest. Everything is done by hand, supposedly. It's actually very fine. There's no sharp edges. There's really nothing to complain about on the welds here. On the body itself, you have a 2-inch tri-clamp port down here for dumping trub and yeast. You have 3 1.5-inch tri-clamp ports here for whatever you want to use them for, really, but most commonly this will be for your racking and transfer to keg. This will be for your hydrometer samples, and this will be for temperature control and measurements. In addition to the base components, Spike kind of makes a lot of their money, I think, by selling a lot of accessories, and you will get kind of nickel and dimed if you want to go all out. But like they say, buy once, cry once. So I got all of the accessories I think I will need in one shot. So here we have the extended legs. These are going to help get the fermenter pretty far off the ground so I can actually gravity transfer into a keg if I want to. It also aids in cleaning so that I don't have to pick the fermenter up I can just drain it into a bucket, and that's going to help out a lot down the road. Because of those legs, we needed an extended bracing shelf here. I also got the caster kit to go with it. The caster kit's going to help me be able to wheel it around instead of carrying it. It doesn't come default with a racking arm, so if you want to actually rack your wort out of the conical, you need to get this racking arm. So I did. I have here a set of tri-clamps, one for 2 inch and one for 1.5 with ball lock quick disconnect so I can connect my hoses, as well as 2 inch and 1.5 inch with ball lock keg posts so that I can facilitate closed transfers to the keg very, very easily. I also got one more butterfly valve, as well as a 2 inch sight glass to see how my trube and yeast dump is going and know when to close that butterfly valve. As well as a 1.5 inch sight glass. I found this sort of custom made 4 inch to 1.5 inch tri-clamp reducer. This is going to help if I want to close off the 4 inch for any reason, as well as a clear cap for the 4 inch if I'm not doing anything too fancy. I got the gas manifold as well, which is going to enable me to pressure transfer and pressure ferment, as well as the obvious choice of getting a ton of new tri-clamp fittings and gaskets, because you're really going to want a lot of extra gaskets. They tend to get lost or broken sometimes. Anyway, now I'm gonna go ahead and spend some time just getting this thing cleaned out, get the factory oil off of it, make sure that it's ready to accept beer. I'll pressure test it and I'll leak test it for a while just to see how it does. Alright, so we completed the Irish Red Ale, here it is by the way, in the spike system, and it turned out to be pretty solid. I was actually able to get this beer to ferment out in about 5 days, but that actually has nothing to do with this fermenter whatsoever. I just ended up giving it a good yeast starter and lots of oxygen, and that's all you really need for a very good fermentation. So anyway, let's just talk about some final observations on the system. We'll go for pros and cons that I've observed based on my experience, as well as a comparison to what I think would be the closest competitor, the SS Brewtech 7-gallon Unitanks system. So first of all, with the pros, my experience with this has been pretty awesome. The stainless steel is great. It is a very durable material, obviously very hard to scratch, very easy to sanitize, and if taken care of properly, should last a lifetime. However, in some cases, your stainless steel fermenters can be kind of a letdown, at least in terms of build quality. Sometimes you might have some cracked welds, sometimes you might have some scratches already in there, and just poor workmanship, especially if you go for more of a budget stainless fermenter. But the build quality on the Spike is pretty much second to none. I can't find a single defect in terms of manufacturing, and in fact, it really is quite impressive just how smooth all the surfaces are in here. There's really no place for any sort of bacteria or gunk to hide. The next perk of stainless steel is that it's very easy to clean, and with these conicals, oftentimes you're going to see a CIP functionality. What that means is clean in place. And using Spike's CIP ball here, which actually just goes right here in the blow-off port, sticks down about that far, you can recirculate PBW through your system for like 20 minutes using a pump, and it'll clean it out pretty nicely. Then you just rinse a couple times, add some sanitizer if you want to, or pressurize if you want to keep everything out, and it works like a charm. It took all of the crud from fermentation off after about 20 minutes and saved me a lot of water, because I would have otherwise used a decent amount of water cleaning this. While I didn't do it on this particular brew, this fermenter is definitely capable of pressure transfer. By using the gas manifold and a couple optional keg disconnects for the 1.5-inch tri-clamps, you can do a 100% oxygen-free transfer from your fermenter into your keg, which is very helpful when brewing certain styles of beer that are sensitive to oxygen. If you want to do a gravity transfer as well, that's also very easy. Even with a sight glass attached to the racking arm and port here, I was able to still have a corny keg sit right below the opening here, so you're capable of gravity transferring very easily from this fermenter with the full leg extensions. Another thing that I didn't do during this particular batch, but intend to do later, and is another perk of stainless steel, is the fact that you can go from brewing a sour beer or a wild ale or a beer with Brett yeast in it, and you could go from doing that, one batch, down to something standard with Saccharomyces on another batch. Because that stainless steel is so easy to sanitize and clean, there's virtually no chance of bacteria or wild yeast being left over and having persistence from batch to batch. It is simply something that cannot be achieved with plastic fermenters. It only works on stainless steel and glass. I was also able to harvest yeast from this very, very easily. The 2-inch dump valve has a very impressive flow rate, although I would highly suggest getting a reducer to put on the end of it so you don't spray the yeast all over. But it was very easy to collect a full mason jar's worth of yeast off of this, and it worked like a dream. This port down here makes it very easy to dump any sort of trub or yeast. So if you have some additional trub that made it into your kettle, you don't want to keep it there, you can dump that on day 2 or 3, and then you can also harvest or completely dump your yeast once the fermentation is complete. Another benefit to this fermenter that I haven't taken advantage of yet, but intend to, is that it is a Unitank. It can hold up to 15 psi of pressure, which means that I'm able to carbonate my beer inside the fermenter using either its natural off-gassed CO2 during carbonation and a spunning valve, or I can add an external carbonation stone to go into the fermenter and actually carbonate the beer externally using my CO2 tank. The benefit of that is it really just cuts down on time. You don't have to wait as long for your beer to carbonate up, and you can then transfer that carbonated beer into a keg with a pressure transfer, or you can actually serve straight from your fermenter if you're into that sort of thing. So most of the pros that I've already mentioned with this system are pretty universal to any stainless fermenter, and in fact you can do pretty much all this stuff if you use a stainless steel corny keg as a fermenter. That is undoubtedly the cheapest and easiest way to get into stainless steel fermenting, especially when you're using it like as a unitank. However, there's a couple more things that set this type of fermenter apart from either a corny keg or things like a stainless steel bucket type fermenter. First and foremost, I think the biggest thing is these 1.5-inch tri-clamp ports and all the modularity that they bring. So this fermenter has 4 1.5-inch tri-clamp ports, 1 4-inch port, and 1 2-inch port down here. And I can stick pretty much anything I want to on various parts of this fermenter for different purposes. So I have things like sight glasses, butterfly valves, a thermo well, a sample port, a blow-off tube. I also have things like the CIP ball. You can get a carb stone as well. And there really are a tremendous amount of things that are made for 1.5-inch tri-clamp. This is kind of the industry standard for a reason. They're also extremely easy to sanitize and take on and take off. So I have things like regular quick disconnects for tubes or keg quick disconnects, and there's also just simple flat caps you can get as well in case you want to put one on the end of your dump valve so that somebody walking by doesn't accidentally open the fermenter. Things like that could always happen. Another big strength of this is that I never really have to open this fermenter from the moment that I pitch the yeast up until after I've transferred it to the keg. So what that does is drastically cuts down on the amount of oxidation and risk for infection that would happen if I was opening up the fermenter to do things like take a gravity sample or check on how the fermentation is going in general, or collect yeast or something like that. To take a gravity sample, all I have to do is open the sample port down here. To check and see how the fermentation is going, all I have to do is look into the sight glass here. To dump trube or harvest yeast, all I have to do is open one of the butterfly valves at the bottom. And of course, to transfer to the keg, all I have to do is open the racking arm or add external pressure to the top of the fermenter. Also, having a conical means that you're going to have clearer beer faster. The tall and narrow shape, along with the cone at the bottom, encourages yeast to actually flocculate out faster than they otherwise would if you were fermenting in a wider or shallower fermenter. Another thing, you'll never have to pick this fermenter up if you get the extended bracing shelf, because when it comes time to transfer to a keg, a standard 5-gallon corny keg will sit right below the racking arm here, and it's very easy to just transfer into the keg, whether you're doing a gravity transfer or pressure transfer. And a regular bucket or pail will fit very easily underneath the dump valve down here. And that means that generally, whether I am transferring beer or draining the fermenter of solution or whatever I'm doing really, it is very easy to just wheel it over to where I need it to go and then either hook up a bucket or a keg to the bottom just to catch everything. And it's really good that I never have to pick this up because it's kind of heavy and very awkward. I did purchase the optional temperature control system for this, and it's awesome what it can do. Having that advanced temperature control and having the ability to keep my fermentation accurate within a degree or two of fluctuation is just very powerful. It definitely helped in keeping this Irish Red very clean tasting, but I'm very excited to see what it can do for things like Belgian beers or English beers, especially during the summertime. It's going to be difficult to keep things cool, so that will help. I use an old mini fridge that I have from my college days as a place to keep a simple cold water reservoir with a pump. Usually mini fridges don't have refrigerant lines through the front door, so I just drilled straight through the front door, ran the lines through, and we were good to go. Having that heating ability is going to help a lot when it comes time to do things like saisons or brewing with a quike at a high temperature. While I have not necessarily tested how hot you can get the fermenter to go, I have tested how cold it will get. And I can confirm that even with about 2 to 3 gallons of cold water at 33 degrees in a fridge, it's not really going to get below 50. So I wouldn't recommend using the temperature control system to try and cold crash with. You can get low, but you really can't get super cold crash temperature low. However, it is perfectly usable to get your temperature down in the right range for any sort of lager. The volume gradations on this thing are very easy to read. They're very bold. It really helps a lot when you have like only this little bit of space up here for light to enter the fermenter. You can still read the exact volume of liquid you have in there at any time. That is a very big convenience feature for me, as sometimes my batch volumes will vary depending on what I'm doing. The last pro I have for this is anecdotal. I have not had to deal with Spike as a company, but most people seem to report that Spike's customer service is legendary. Now, while I cannot guarantee this because I haven't gone through this process, nearly every review that I saw on the internet said that if they had a defective part, Spike sent them one for free as a replacement. It's nice to have solid customer service behind a company, especially when you're paying a lot of money for their product. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and talk about cons, because this is definitely not a perfect fermenter by any means. And if you're in the market for something like this, it is ultimately up to you to decide whether or not this type of thing is the right thing for you. Weigh those pros and cons and make your decision accordingly. First of all, we're just gonna get this out of the way up front, really. It's just simply not a cheap fermenter. It's expensive. It's a solid piece of equipment. The steel does cost a lot, and steel prices are rising throughout this year. Second of all, you're paying for this welding job. This is not something that's just done by machine. These are done by an actual person welding on those tri-clamp fittings. The second con is definitely worth mentioning on its own as a separate con, even though it still relates to cost, and that is all of these accessories don't come with the base kit, which doesn't necessarily make that much sense to me. What it does is effectively lower the price of the base fermenter by itself, so that it is lower than the rest of the competition, but it doesn't really give you all the functionality you need. For example, the racking arm that is required to actually get the wort from down below the level of the actual tri-clamp port is not included with the base kit, which makes no sense whatsoever. The additional cost of the racking arm is actually not that much, but if that's the case, then why not just include it in the total kit? It's included on the Flex and the Flex Plus, so why not include it on the CF line of fermenters? And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize when they first buy this, and that ends up screwing the customer over a little bit. But depending on the types of accessories that you want and how many of them that you want, it's going to potentially run you up the full cost of the fermenter already, on top of buying the fermenter itself. The next con here is that I put on casters on the bottom so that I could move the fermenter around. I think that's been very helpful. However, it's really unstable, especially when you get higher up on these extended legs. And when it's full, it tends to kind of wobble a lot. And that doesn't make me super comfortable when it's sitting, on the sidelines. I would just say be very, very careful if you have this full of beer or wort and it's on casters and you have to move it around. Take it slow and make sure that those wheels don't shoot out from underneath of you. It could be an issue. It is very stable on the default feet that come with the kit, but the casters themselves, I think, could stand to be a bit bigger. Also, another con that's related to accessories is that it just doesn't come with any extra tri-clamp gaskets or fittings, which doesn't make any sense to me because you kind of need them. You might have issues where you lose a gasket or have a broken one, so it really does help to have a little bit of a stockpile of extra gaskets and extra tri-clamp fittings in case you just don't have them on standby, and the fact that that doesn't come extra in the kit is kind of, again, ridiculous. So also the lid has its own big gasket that allows it to hold pressure. It is kind of weird in that it doesn't really sit perfectly inside the lid, and it seems like that's a problem that nearly every owner has. It's easily adjusted, it's easily fixed in my opinion. I don't see it as a very large con, but it could be an issue for some people. It just tends to kind of fall out a lot, so if you're taking the lid off to clean it, or for example, just keep in mind that gasket's gonna come off probably, and it might make you upset. I don't see any reason why it should be as loose as it actually is. So it's definitely another drawback in my opinion. Next up, of course, the size and the weight of this thing is much, much more than either the Fermzilla was, or a plastic bucket, or a glass carboy. It's not just something you're gonna be able to sit in the corner and kind of get used to having it there. It's like the size of a piece of furniture. Like it's actually a decently sized piece of equipment, and it's gonna stick out wherever you put it. But some people might want that because it is obviously a nice shiny piece of equipment that says, hey, I like to brew. Depending on how you view that, it could be a con, it could be a pro. But just keep in mind, this thing's heavy, it's bulky, and it is going to take up space. This sample port over here is interesting because it's kind of all or nothing when it comes to the flow. You'll unscrew it a bunch and nothing will come out, and then all of a sudden it just goes out. So if you're trying to take a small hydrometer sample, just be very careful with that. It is kind of like either a strong flow or no flow. So I haven't pressure fermented in this yet, but when I pressure tested it, I had a really hard time actually keeping the pressure in the tank. So Larry from, I think it's Larry's Barbecue and Home Brewing. It's another YouTube channel out there on home brewing. He's done a complete review of this system, and he said something that was a very good point, and I want to kind of reiterate here. And that is, while there's an awesome amount of modularity and just general usefulness that's added by having all these different tri-clamp ports, it also means that it's a double-edged sword, because there's just as many places where you could potentially have a pressure leak, and you add a new potential spot for a leak with every other attachment you put on this. And that's something that I experienced myself. When I did a pressure test of this thing, I actually ended up losing 2 or 3 PSI over the course of an overnight. And that can obviously be a problem. If you want to pressure ferment in this thing, or carb as a unitank, you really better make damn sure that all your seals are clean and actually pressure tested before you actually go ahead and do that. The last piece that I'm really not a big fan of is just these handles here. It says, do not lift when full on it, which is like, why do you have handles on it in the first place then? I suppose the only reason I can really think of is that if you don't have the extended legs on this, it's just the short legs, then it makes sense to be able to grab it by the handles when you're moving it around and stuff, but that's why you have wheels. If they're gonna have handles on this, I'd like to see Spike install handles that they're actually confident of handling the weight of a full fermenter. It kind of feels like it's a little bit of a redundant product if it can't actually do what it's designed to do. And the next thing we're gonna go over here is how I think this stacks up to what I consider to be probably its most significant competition, and that's the SS Brewtech 7-gallon Unitank. And those, first of all, are extremely similar systems at the end of the day. So all of this stuff is just going to be nitpicking, but this is kind of my thought process as to the things that I picked out that I liked more about the Spike system than I did versus the SS Brewtech. And I imagine some of you guys probably want to know that stuff as well. So first of all, the price. Spike's base kit, which is just the fermenter and a couple essentials, not including the racking arm, is significantly cheaper than SS Brewtech's base kit. You're going to get more accessories with SS Brewtech's base kit, which is where the cost kind of starts to get made up a little bit, but there's a chance you may not actually be somebody that wants all of those accessories. So if you're somebody that just wants the base kit as a fermenter, just the fermenter, no, not the fancy nuts and bolts, you don't need extra sight glasses, CIP balls, carb stones, stuff like that, then it might just be better off for you to buy the Spike instead of the SS Brewtech. It might be cheaper for you. However, when it comes down to it, when I bought all of these accessories for it, and these are the ones that I wanted and knew I would use, it ended up being a little bit more than if I bought the entire kit from SS Brewtech, including all of its bells and whistles. Spike has a couple advantages though that justified that cost for me. One of the first ones is that it has a 2-inch dump port on the bottom versus the SS Brewtech, which has a 1.5-inch dump port. What that basically means is that you have less of a chance of getting a clogged dump port or just a stuck yeast dump in general, or a trub dump, if you have a lot of debris in there. And kind of to put that to the test, I emptied out the fermenter after my fermentation was done, so there was no liquid in there, there was no pressure in there, and then I tried to do a yeast dump just with gravity, and it worked like a charm. Got everything out. It all came out and never got stuck. So I think a large part of that is due to the fact that it's a wider aperture for all that stuff to go through. The other benefit for me is that Spike is undoubtedly easier to clean, especially by hand. So you can take this entire lid off, whereas the SS Brewtech only allows you to get up to about a 6-inch opening off. So when it comes time to clean it, if you're not using a CIP ball, that could become a very important thing for you. Even if you're using a CIP ball though, you actually still need to get into the racking arm that is integrated into the SS Brewtech in order to guarantee that it's clean. The Spike's racking arm comes as a tri-clamp accessory, so you can just take that off and clean it independently. That makes it a lot easier. In addition, having that lid come off completely means that you can guarantee that the underside of the lid here that you can't see on the SS Brewtech is indeed clean. And the last category where I think the Spike really wins is in half batches. In the Spike, I could guarantee you that with a 2.5 gallon batch, your thermowell will be submerged, as well as your temperature control coil as it goes down into the wort. Apparently, and I have no experience in this, so I'm really just talking based on anecdotes, apparently the SS Brewtech doesn't necessarily have that ability. I could be wrong though, so if I am, let me know in the comment section down below, and that way people know. There is one area though where the SS Brewtech undoubtedly blows Spike out of the water, and that is the ability to hold significant pressure. So Spike is rated for up to 15 psi. I can't recall if they're tested up to a certain level, but it's written right here on the lid, basically do not exceed 15 psi. The SS Brewtech, on the other hand, is rated up to 30 psi and tested up to 60 psi. Where you would actually use 30 or 60 psi in the brewing process though, I have no idea. And when it comes down to it, 15 psi is more than adequate for pressure fermentation, pressure transfers, and carbonating your beer. You don't really need anything more than that for any other application. So I figured that that was going to be fine. However, knowing that your fermenter is built like a tank and will hold that much pressure and take that much abuse, I suppose that's a pretty good thing. At the end of the day though, they are both extremely similar fermenters, and if you're in the market for a high-end stainless conical, either one of these is going to probably fit your bill perfectly. You can't really go wrong. They're very similarly priced, very similar in build quality and usability, and also very similar in terms of what you can expect to get out of them at the end of the day. But lastly, I really just want to reiterate this again and again and again. Better equipment does not make better beer. At the end of the day, really, I think that a lot of people end up buying this high-end type of equipment because they think that the equipment's going to help them make better beer. In a way, that may be true because it does make your brewing process a lot more controllable, and it does help in terms of convenience. Those are the main reasons I bought it, and that I suppose has kind of a cascading effect in terms of making your beer a little bit more consistent and quality control in a way, but I have made tons and tons and tons of great beers, including lagers, New England IPAs, Belgian beers, all in bucket fermenters, and I've been very successful in that. It has nothing to do with the equipment. All in all, though, I am extremely happy with this. It's probably the last fermenter I'm ever going to buy unless I ever upgrade to like something like a 10-gallon batch, which I don't really see myself doing with the pace that I brew. The pros far outweigh the cons for me on this particular piece of equipment, and it is something that I intend to use for the rest of my brewing career. I will take very good care of it, and I don't really ever foresee myself buying a different fermenter or really upgrading beyond this. However, my experience with it over the last brew has been nothing short of fantastic, and I am really excited to see what it can do in some upcoming brews. Again, fear not if you don't have this type of equipment. I am still going to be producing content that is relatable to all home brewers. If anything, this is just going to give you guys as viewers more accurate details on what the fermentation requirements are for a particular beer that I'm making a video on. All right, thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked the video, and if you learned something and you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. Also hit the subscribe button if you want to see this content on a regular basis. I'm doing my best to upload weekly right now. Typically every other week will be a grain to glass video where I'm brewing a beer, and on the off weeks I'll be doing something like this or a more informative video. So if that's your type of thing, hit that subscribe button. And if you want more frequent content, feel free to check me out on Instagram. That's at The Apartment Brewer on Instagram, as well as on my Patreon, which I'm gonna link up here in the corner. My Patreon has a lot of additional video content for your enjoyment. I'm gonna drop a couple links in the description box for various places where you can find this fermenter. You can of course buy it from Spike outright, but there's a couple other retailers out there that carry these products as well. I got mine from Bobby at brewhardware.com, and I believe they also sell them at greatfermentations.com. In the description box, you're also gonna find a complete list of all of my homebrewing equipment that's not just fermenters, and links to Amazon or other retailers where you can purchase them as well if you're in the market for that stuff. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you in the next one. So until then, cheers.